The nightmare continues as we move on to the third episode of the Mother's Rosario arc. At this point, calling it a next episode feels generous. It is more like another round in an endurance test I did not sign up for. 2 episodes in, my patience is already on life support, and yet here we are. I am pressing play again like this is some kind of self-inflicted psychological experiment. This is the part where a normal show would start picking up momentum, raising stakes, or at the very least pretending that something interesting might happen. Instead, Sword Art Online doubles down on everything that made the first episodes unbearable. More talking, more sitting, more characters explaining things that either do not matter or actively make the world building worse the more you think about them. By episode 3, the honeymoon period is long gone. There's no benefit of the doubt left. Any illusion that this arc might magically redeem itself has evaporated completely. This is no longer curiosity. This is morbid fascination. Like watching a slow motion car crash where each new scene somehow manages to make the wreckage even worse. So buckle up. The nightmare is not only continuing, it is settling in, getting comfortable, and making it very clear that it plans to stay for the full runtime. The punishment of Prometheus from Greek mythology sounds like a relaxing getaway compared to suffering through Sword Art Online. Chained to a rock for eternity while an eagle eats your liver every day honestly feels like a better deal. At least Prometheus knew what he did to deserve it. At least his torment had narrative weight. At least there was no exposition dump while it was happening. Prometheus did not have to sit through endless padded filler disguised as character moments. He did not have to listen to boring dialogue that goes in circles while pretending to be deep. He did not have to endure characters restating information we already know, or worse, explaining mechanics that collapse under the slightest scrutiny. Every day the eagle came back, did its thing, and left. Clean, efficient. No wasted runtime. No fake emotional beats. No smug insistence that this was meaningful storytelling. Compared to that, watching Sword Art Online feels like being trapped in an eternal writer's room where no one has heard the word restraint. If Greek mythology had included an afterlife punishment where you are forced to watch poorly written anime arcs on repeat, that would have been reserved for the worst sinners imaginable. And yet here I am enduring it episode by episode. Like some modern tragic hero whose fatal flaw is refusing to drop a show even after it has proven repeatedly that it has nothing worthwhile to offer. I would not even wish this upon my worst enemy. This is not entertainment, it is an endurance test. It is baffling how Sword Art Online fans unironically enjoy this show, sit through all of this, and then come out the other side insisting it was meaningful, emotional, or well-written. That is the truly impressive part. At some point, it stops being a difference in taste and starts feeling like a parallel reality. We are clearly not watching the same thing. I am watching incoherent game mechanics, lazy writing, sloppy pacing, boring characters, recycled assets, and dialogue that exists only to pad the runtime. They are apparently watching a masterpiece. I genuinely do not understand how those two experiences can exist at the same time. What really gets me is the sincerity. This is not ironic enjoyment. This is not guilty pleasure territory. They love this. They defend it. They recommend it to others with a straight face. That is what breaks my brain. It is like being shown a burning trash can and being told to appreciate the warmth and symbolism. If this were some niche forgotten anime, I could at least understand. But no, this is held up as one of the greats. People cry over it. People call it peak fiction. Meanwhile, I am sitting here wondering if we have collectively lowered our standards so far that basic competence now qualifies as genius. I truly would not wish this experience on anyone. And yet somehow, millions of people willingly return for more, smiling the entire time. That is not just baffling. That is terrifying. I wish this show did not exist. But unfortunately, I did not find a magic lamp, and no genie showed up to grant me even the smallest mercy. If I had 3 wishes, I would not even need all of them. 1 would be enough. Just erase this show from existence and let the timeline heal. Instead, we live in the universe where Sword Art Online exists, thrives, and somehow gets praised. No cosmic correction, no divine intervention, no reality check. Just me, this show, and the slow realization that the genie clearly took one look at this situation and decided it was not his problem. It is honestly impressive in the worst possible way. Out of all the things fiction has given us, this is what survives. Not because it is good, but because nothing stepped in to stop it. And here I am, trapped in the aftermath, wishing for magic that never comes and mercy that was never promised. Yuki introduces Asuna to her guild, the Sleeping Knights, and I immediately rolled my eyes. That name is painfully dumb. This game is supposed to be based on Norse mythology, and yet we are suddenly dealing with knights. Medieval European knights, from a completely different culture, a completely different time period, a completely different mythological framework. There were no knights in Norse mythology. None. Zero. Vikings did not have chivalric orders, shining armor, or knightly vows. They had raiders, warriors, berserkers, jarls, and gods who solved problems by smashing things with hammers. Calling a guild the Sleeping Knights in a Norse-themed game is like naming your faction the Samurai Templars and expecting nobody to notice how stupid that sounds. It once again shows how little care was put into the world building of this show. The name does not fit the setting, the theme, or the mythology. It is just a generic fantasy buzzword slapped on, because it sounds cool to people who do not think about it for more than 2 seconds. Knights are a medieval Western European concept. Norse mythology predates that and operates on an entirely different cultural logic. Mixing the two without explanation is lazy, not clever. If the show actually respected its own premise, the guild would have been named after something from Norse lore. Einherjar, Valkyries, Berserkers, anything that actually belongs in that world. Instead, we get Sleeping Knights, which feels like the author reached into the most overused fantasy drawer possible and grabbed the first thing he saw. This is Sword Art Online in a nutshell. A setting with rich mythological inspiration that gets ignored in favor of generic fantasy nonsense. The result is a world that feels incoherent, shallow, and slapped together without any real thought. When Sword Art Online uses the term knights in a game explicitly themed around Norse mythology, it is not a clever reinterpretation. It is an anachronism. A genre shortcut. A generic fantasy label slapped onto a setting it does not belong to. And why choose the adjective sleeping? These players are very clearly awake, conscious, alert, and actively playing the game. Nothing about them is sleeping. That is like calling your guild the Blind People when every single member has perfect eyesight. If the name is supposed to be metaphorical, then congratulations, it fails at that too. There is no established symbolism, no mythological grounding, and no in-world explanation that makes sleeping meaningful here. It is not tied to Norse mythology, it is not tied to game mechanics, and it is not tied to their behavior. It is just a random word stapled onto an already out-of-place noun. At best, it sounds like the writer thought it sounded cool and dramatic and never bothered to think about what it actually means. At worst, it is another example of surface-level fantasy naming where words are chosen for vibes rather than logic. A name is supposed to communicate identity, theme, or purpose. This one communicates none of that. So you end up with a guild name that is wrong on 2 levels. Knights, which do not belong in a Norse-themed setting, and sleeping, which does not even describe the people using the name. It is not poetic. It is not clever. It is just nonsense that sounds vaguely fantasy-adjacent and hopes the audience does not stop to think about it. Unfortunately for the show, stopping to think about it is all it takes for the whole thing to fall apart. Guild names are supposed to communicate something about skill, identity, or attitude. Sleeping Knights sounds weak, passive, and unimpressive. If I saw that name on a leaderboard or before a PvP match, I would not think of them as an elite group or endgame challenge. I would think inactive guild that logs in once a week and forgets to repair their gear. Names matter, and this one undersells them at every possible level. The tone is completely wrong for how the guild is portrayed. The show wants you to see them as tragic, noble, and determined. Sleeping Knights sounds like a joke guild name someone came up with at 3 in the morning because everything good name was already taken. There's a massive disconnect between how serious the story treats them and how unserious their name sounds. The name completely kills intimidation. In online games, guild names are part of psychological warfare. Strong names make enemies hesitate. Weak names invite mockery. Nobody is afraid of a group called Sleeping Knights. It sounds like a tutorial faction or a beginner clan that will disband in a week. If these players are supposed to be respected veterans, the name does them no favors. The name is also forgettable. A good guild name sticks in your head. Sleeping Knights blends into the background immediately. It is generic fantasy filler with no sharp edges, no distinct imagery, and no strong identity. You could swap it with a dozen other fantasy guild names and nobody would notice. The name does not reflect gameplay reality at all. These players are actively raiding, coordinating, fighting bosses, and pushing content. There is nothing dormant, inactive, or hidden about them. The name does not describe how they play, how they interact, or what they do in the game. It is disconnected from their actual behavior. The name sounds like something a non-gamer thinks sounds cool. This is a recurring problem in Sword Art Online. Names feel like they were written from the outside looking in, not by someone who understands how players actually name things. Real guild names tend to be either very intimidating, very ironic on purpose, or very personal. Sleeping Knights lands in an awkward middle ground where it is not funny enough to be ironic and not strong enough to be serious. Sword Art Online has always been terrible at names, and this is no different. The series has a long and proud tradition of throwing together words that sound vaguely cool, dramatic or fantasy adjacent, without any concern for meaning, consistency, or context. Names are not chosen because they fit the world, the mythology, or the themes. They were chosen because the writer thought they sounded edgy in the moment. That is how you end up with guild names, skills, and titles that collapse the second you think about them for more than 5 seconds. They exist purely at the surface level, designed to sound impressive rather than make sense. This is especially embarrassing in a franchise that constantly leans on fantasy and mythological aesthetics. Names are one of the easiest ways to build immersion, yet Sword Art Online repeatedly treats them like an afterthought. There is no cultural grounding, no internal logic, and no effort to make the terminology feel like it belongs to the same universe. So, when a name like this shows up, it does not feel surprising or creative. It feels inevitable. It is just another entry in a long list of poorly thought out labels that exist only to sound cool and end up sounding dumb instead. I am not even a professional writer, and I can already think of several better names off the top of my head that would fit this guild and the game better. Which honestly just makes this more embarrassing for the people who are actually paid to write this. I am not sitting in a room full of writers. I am not being storyboarded. I am not being constrained by marketing, deadlines, or a production committee. And yet, with zero effort, I can come up with names that are more intimidating, more thematic, more memorable, and more consistent with the world than Sleeping Knights. That is the problem. When a random viewer can outperform the official writing without breaking a sweat, something has gone very wrong. If the writers actually wanted a guild name that fit a Norse-inspired game world, they had an absurd number of better options available. Norse mythology is overflowing with strong imagery, legendary warriors, gods, weapons, fate, and death. And yet they somehow landed on Sleeping Knights, a name that sounds like it belongs to a retirement home instead of a high-level combat guild. Names like Einherjar or the Valkyries would have instantly grounded the group in the setting, evoking fallen warriors chosen for Valhalla or divine figures tied to battle and death. Even slight variations such as Valkyrie's Oath or Einherjar Ascendant would have carried weight. History and purpose, all things the actual name completely lacks. If they wanted something darker or more tragic, which would have fit the arc far better, there were still countless choices that did not sound embarrassing. Names like Fallen Einherjar, Valhalla's Remnant, or Last Valkyries immediately suggest finality, loss, and struggle without needing a single line of exposition. These kinds of names communicate tone instantly, something Sleeping Knights utterly fails to do. Instead of sounding somber or legendary, it sounds passive and unintimidating, like a joke name that never got replaced. Even leaning into elite status and combat focus would have been easy. References to Odin or his weapon could have worked perfectly, with names such as Gungnir's Chosen, Odin's Mark, or Spear of Gungnir. These are not obscure references either. They are some of the most basic elements of Norse mythology. The kind of thing you find within the first few paragraphs of any summary. The fact that none of this made it into the naming process strongly suggests that research was either minimal or non-existent. They could have even tied the name to fate itself, which is a massive theme in Norse myth. Concepts like word, destiny, and inevitability lend themselves naturally to a tragic warrior guild. Names such as Fatebound Einherjar, Threads of Word, or Oath of Word sound mythic and deliberate, as if the group understands their place in the world and has accepted it. Compared to that, Sleeping Knights feels empty, generic, and completely disconnected from the setting it is supposed to belong to. Instead, the show lands on Sleeping Knights, a name that sounds like it was placeholder text that accidentally made it into the final script. It feels like the writer said, "We will fix this later," and then never did. And that is what makes it so funny. Not funny in a clever way. Funny in a how did this pass every review stage kind of way. If this is the best they could come up with, it really does explain a lot about the rest of the writing. I can come up with multiple better names in seconds that fit the world, the tone, and the themes far more effectively. When a viewer can do that casually, it highlights just how little care went into the original choice. Sleeping Knights does not feel like a thoughtfully named guild. It feels like a placeholder from the first draft that was never replaced, which perfectly sums up the level of care this series puts into its world building. The fact that this game is called Alfheim Online when multiple other realms or worlds clearly exist should already tell you everything you need to know about the naming quality on display here. Alfheim is just one realm in Norse mythology. Not the whole setting, not the central hub of reality, not the umbrella term for everything. Yet the game slaps that name on the entire product and calls it a day. This immediately tells you the author did not care about coherence or accuracy. He did not think through the implications of the name or what it suggests about the world. He just grabbed a mythological word that sounded fantasy enough, glued online to the end of it, and moved on. There's no deeper logic here. No attempt to reflect the structure of the world. No concern for how the name relates to the other realms that players actively visit. It would be like naming a game Earth Online and then revealing that most of the content takes place on Mars, Jupiter, and a dozen other planets. At that point, the title is not just misleading, it is meaningless. The name stops describing the world and starts functioning as random flavor text. Once again, Sword Art Online shows that it treats names as decoration, not world building. They are chosen for vibes, not for sense. And when the very title of the game inside your story is already this sloppy, it becomes painfully obvious that nothing underneath it was thought through very carefully either. The members of the Sleeping Knights all go through the ritual of introducing themselves to Asuna. And honestly, I am not even going to waste a single neuron trying to remember their names or what they are supposed to bring to the table. It is pointless. None of them will matter after this arc, so why bother? They exist solely as props to make Asuna look good or to pad the runtime. These are not characters you care about. They are just background noise given a few lines so the show can pretend it has a cast. Trying to invest in them would be like trying to root for mannequins in a store display. They move, they talk, but they have no substance, no personality, and no reason for you to care. All of the character designs for the Sleeping Knights members are painfully basic, generic, and utterly boring. In a fantasy game that is supposed to be full of magic, epic quests, and larger-than-life heroes, it is shocking how every single player looks like they raided a bargain bin for outfits. There is no flair, no unique touches, no personality shining through their gear, just bland colors, generic armor, and predictable weapons. In a world built for escapism and fantasy, every character should feel like someone you want to watch or fight alongside. Instead, these designs scream, "We did the bare minimum," and make it clear that the creators could not be bothered to give them even a shred of imagination. It is like playing a high-budget game where every NPC looks like they are wearing pajamas from the clearance section. And did they seriously have to have that one guy squinting the whole time? It is not just lazy animation, it comes across as offensive and stereotypical toward Asian people. Which is especially baffling considering the author himself is Asian. He is literally setting back his own community by allowing this to appear on screen. How does he not realize how ridiculous and harmful this looks? It is the kind of detail that makes you wonder if anyone involved in production even thought for 2 seconds about the implications, or if they just shrugged and said, "Sure, why not?" It is embarrassing and tone-deaf in a way that makes the whole scene feel smaller and stupider than it already is. And this is not even the first time this has happened. One of the members from the Moonlit Black Cats in the original Sword Art Online game also spent the entire time squinting like it was his defining character trait. The author does not learn from his mistakes. He does not grow, he does not improve. Instead, he keeps recycling the same lazy, tone-deaf choices and calling it storytelling. And the real shame? The fans who eat up this garbage, cheer for it, and enable him to crank out more trash, decade after decade. It is like applauding someone for failing spectacularly, and then begging them to fail even harder. Yuki also introduces herself to Asuna, and I have to ask, why were the other players even calling her Zekken when her username is clearly Yuki? Where did the name Zekken even come from? It is like the show just slapped a random nickname on her because it sounded cool with zero explanation or logic. This is the kind of sloppy writing that makes you scratch your head and wonder if anyone actually thought through the basic rules of their own universe. Names are important in online games. They matter. Yet here, the show treats them like an afterthought, tossing them around like confetti at a party no one asked for. The voice acting for Yuki does not fit the character at all. She sounds like a rough-and-tumble tomboy when she is supposed to come across as a timid, delicate little girl. It is jarring, awkward, and completely takes you out of the scene. Instead of feeling empathy or connecting with her, you are left wondering if the casting director just picked someone at random off the street and said, "Sure, this will do." It makes the character feel inconsistent and hollow, as if the show cannot even bother to match personality with voice, which is one of the most basic elements of animation. Yuki explains that they want to be the only guild to beat the boss on this floor and that they need Asuna to help them. But why Asuna specifically? Kirito is a much stronger player than Asuna. He literally defeated the Gleam Eyes on his own back in Sword Art Online, which was a boss on a much higher floor and far more dangerous. So why are they not asking for the help of Kirito? The answer is obvious. The story wants to focus on Asuna. So the writer had to invent some completely contrived reason to keep Kirito out of the equation. It is lazy, it is forced, and it insults the intelligence of the audience. The logic of the universe is tossed out the window just to prop up a character for the sake of spotlight time, which is exactly the kind of sloppy storytelling that makes this show so exhausting to watch. Asuna says that the Sleeping Knights are very ambitious since a boss raid usually takes 49 players, which is 7 parties with 7 players each. But why did they have to spell that out for the audience? I am pretty sure anyone watching this show can do basic multiplication in their head. Oh wait, maybe they felt the need to explain it because the majority of Sword Art Online fans are under the age of 3. It is a kind of condescending exposition that makes you want to throw your remote at the screen and question every life choice that led you here. And if it really takes 49 players to defeat a boss normally, then Kirito defeating the Gleam Eyes on his own back in Sword Art Online becomes even more ridiculous. The show is basically admitting that Kirito is as strong as multiple raid groups combined. It is absurd, over the top, and completely breaks any sense of balance in the game world. At this point, Kirito is less a human character and more a walking, sword-wielding cheat code, and the story expects you to just accept it without question. It is the kind of power inflation that makes every other fight meaningless and every other player look incompetent. Asuna mentions that it would be unrealistic for her and the Sleeping Knights to defeat the floor boss because they are only 7 players in total. But she was there in the room when Kirito defeated the Gleam Eyes on his own. So after seeing that, nothing should be unrealistic to her anymore. By her own logic, a single player could take down the entire raid, a horde of dragons, or even a real-life army, and she would just nod along like it is normal. It is hilarious how the show pretends to care about realism while expecting the audience to ignore the giant contradictions sitting right in front of them. Plus, Kirito defeated Heathcliff, the final boss of Sword Art Online, on his own as well. So why is it suddenly so hard for Asuna to believe that 7 players could defeat a lower-level floor boss? That should not be impossible by any stretch. In real life, players in online games are always finding clever ways to beat bosses, even when they are underleveled or outnumbered. 7 determined players could absolutely figure out a strategy to take one down. Yet the show acts like this is some impossible feat, which just highlights how lazy and unimaginative the writing really is. For example, in old-school RuneScape, some players have defeated Stockjad on a level 3 account, which is the absolute lowest level in the game. They figured out clever strategies, exploited mechanics, and basically outsmarted the game itself. So the fact that 7 players in Alfheim Online cannot defeat a floor boss just makes them look incompetent and lazy. It is not the boss fight itself that is impossible. It is the writers who cannot be bothered to make the players actually smart or capable. Oh, and here we go again. This is yet another scene where the characters are just sitting around, talking to each other in a restaurant or cafe. I have completely lost count of how many times Sword Art Online has recycled this exact setup. It is like the writer has a checklist. Need to dump exposition? Sit them at a table and have them talk. Apparently, coming up with any other method to deliver information is way too much work. This show is basically a masterclass in laziness. Yuki explains that they tried to fight the floor bosses on floor 25 and 26. They put up a good fight, but both times a huge guild swooped in and beat the boss before them. So this means that the game does not have instances. Everything is open world. That would be absolutely awful for boss fights because of this exact reason. Imagine spending hours coordinating with your guild, getting ready for a big fight, and then another guild just shows up and steals the kill in all of your glory. It would be infuriating. If this was a real game, players would be frustrated, angry, and many of them would quit. No one wants to work hard only to have someone else take credit for it. This is not exciting or challenging. This is just sloppy and unfair game design. There should be private instances where guilds can fight a boss without random players crashing the party and stealing all the credit. That is how real games handle big fights. But, of course, in this masterpiece of terrible design, the bosses do not even respawn. They are one-time encounters only. That is horrible game design on its own. It punishes players for not being in the right place at the right time and makes all your efforts meaningless if you miss it. If this were a real game, people would riot, scream, and quit in frustration. Instead, the show acts like this is perfectly fine and totally normal. What would even happen if someone started playing the game a few years later, and all the bosses had already been slain? There would be absolutely nothing left to do. No epic fights, no rare loot, no glory. Just a big empty world where you wander around like a sad NPC. Any sensible player would quit immediately. But, of course, the writer never paused to think about this. Planning ahead is clearly not part of his skill set. It is just sloppy, lazy storytelling piled on top of terrible game design. It makes absolutely no sense for the developers of this game to pour countless hours. And who knows how many millions of dollars into creating 100 entirely unique bosses for each floor, only for them to disappear and never respawn the instant someone defeats them. All that painstaking design work, the intricate animations, the clever attack patterns, the lore behind each monster. Poof, gone, never to be seen again. Imagine spending years of your life making something incredible and then locking it in a vault that no one can ever open. If this were a real game, players would be furious. They would riot, demand refunds, and write angry forum posts for decades. But in this universe, apparently it is perfectly fine for all that effort to vanish into nothing, because who cares about sustainable gameplay or player satisfaction? Not the writer, clearly. This is the digital equivalent of building the Taj Mahal just to bulldoze it 5 minutes later. The characters explain that they will be busy next spring with other things, so they are going to disband the guild. Before that, they wanted to do something so amazing and unbelievable that it would be remembered forever. Really? Beating a floor boss is supposed to be that incredible? There are literally 100 floor bosses in this game, each one designed to be fought by anyone with a pulse and a headset. If they truly wanted to do something unique and unforgettable, it should have been something no one else could ever do. Something that would make players stop mid-game and gasp in awe. Instead, they settled for the equivalent of eating a sandwich. Hardly life-changing, and definitely not legendary. This is the kind of overhyped nonsense only Sword Art Online could call unforgettable. And this is not even the only virtual reality full dive game in the Sword Art Online universe. There are countless other games, each one more pointless than the last. Who exactly is going to care that they defeated a low-level floor boss in some random game nobody asked for? That is not amazing, and that is not unbelievable. It is basically grinding for bragging rights in a universe where literally everything else is more impressive. It is like celebrating that you managed to tie your shoes while a dragon is burning the village down. I doubt even most of the players in this game are going to care all that much about who defeated the floor boss. I have been playing RuneScape for over 20 years, and I could not tell you who was the first player to get level 99 in any skill if my life depended on it. Nobody is going to care about some mundane achievement. Even if you were the first person in the history of the world to do it. It is basically meaningless, and the show is trying way too hard to make it look impressive. I mean, look at Kirito. He was the one who literally beat Sword Art Online and freed everyone from a death game. And yet most people in real life, including his own sister, could not even recognize his in-game name. His own sister did not even know that a player named Kirito was actually her brother. Talk about your epic heroics going completely unnoticed. It is like saving the world and nobody gives you a participation trophy. The players who defeat a floor boss get their names inscribed on the Monument of Swordsmen. But wait a minute. This was originally the Monument of Life back in Sword Art Online, and it had the names of all 10,000 players trapped in the game. Anyone who died would have their name crossed out. So now we are taking something that was grim, macabre, and terrifying and turning it into a celebratory little plaque. It is like turning a haunted graveyard into a theme park and clapping for it. Completely tone-deaf and absurd. The most baffling part is why the developers would even think it was a good idea to recycle Sword Art Online bosses in the first place. These are not just nostalgic callback enemies. These bosses literally killed real people back when Sword Art Online was a death game. Actual players died in real life fighting them. Turning that into casual game content is unbelievably insensitive and tone-deaf. It is not fan service, it is tasteless. It is like digging up a traumatic event and slapping a "have fun" sticker on it. Imagine taking something associated with real loss and suffering and repackaging it as entertainment, complete with loot drops and respawn timers. That is not clever, and it is definitely not respectful. The game treats these bosses like quirky legacy content, but in universe they should be symbols of horror, not weekend raid material. The fact that nobody in the story seriously questions this just makes the whole thing feel even more uncomfortable. It is not exciting, it is not cool, and it certainly is not fun. It is just another example of the show not thinking through the implications of its own world. And why is it even called the Monument of Swordsmen? Most of the players in this game are not even swordsmen. You have archers, mages, healers, speed types, and probably some weird hybrid nobody asked for. And yet we are supposed to celebrate them on a monument that only acknowledges swordsmen. It is like calling a monument the champions of running when half the people there are cyclists and swimmers. Completely arbitrary and painfully lazy. Also, the name swordsman does not fit the world or theme of the game. Norse mythology is filled with warriors, but they are usually Vikings, berserkers, or legendary heroes, not swordsmen as a distinct class. Most Norse fighters were depicted wielding axes, spears, or sometimes swords, but there is no category of swordsman, like in medieval chivalric traditions. So calling something in a Norse-themed game the Monument of Swordsmen is super anachronistic. It makes about as much sense as putting knights in Asgard. The concept exists in the game world only because the writers borrowed generic fantasy tropes, not because of authentic Norse mythology. It is absolutely hilarious how the character in the show admits that getting their names inscribed is a little silly and vain. The show even pauses for a moment to acknowledge how dumb this whole plot point is, basically winking at the audience, and yet it barrels ahead anyway like nothing is wrong. It is as if the writers are saying, yes, we know this is ridiculous and stupid, but let us waste time anyway. Comedy gold. If your idea of comedy is watching people celebrate meaningless virtual bragging rights, there is a close-up of the Monument of Swordsmen and every single player has the perfect name. No misspellings, no numbers, no underscores, no XX underscore Darkslayer underscore 99 underscore XX nonsense. Everyone just gets exactly the username they wanted on the first try. It is laughable how the show treats this as normal. In any real online game, that would be the stuff of legends. Most of the time, you are forced to add random numbers or intentionally misspell your name, because your preferred name is already taken. But here, everyone is handed their dream name on a silver platter like they are special snowflakes in a perfect world where rules do not exist. That is the truly unrealistic part of this show. Not the bosses, not the combat, not even the overpowered main characters. Just the fact that usernames are flawless. The Monument of Swordsmen has the names of main characters like Kirito, Asuna, Lifa, and Klein all inscribed together. But here's the kicker. They were never actually in a group together. It is absolutely baffling. In the game, they were hanging out with completely different players. Yet, the show acts like they were some elite squad bonded by destiny. Why did the author do that? Probably because continuity and logic are just pesky obstacles when you want to make the main characters look extra special. It is like handing out participation trophies to people who were not even in the race. Oh, and it gets even better. Kirito, the great solo legend who spent half of Sword Art Online bragging about how he is a one-man army, suddenly decides that teaming up with other players is a brilliant idea. That is right. The mighty soloist who literally built his reputation on doing everything alone is now casually joining a group like it is the most natural thing in the world. The writing cannot even stay consistent for 2 seconds. And yet we are supposed to take this seriously. It is like watching a superhero film where Superman suddenly decides he needs a sidekick because, well, teamwork makes the plot easier to write. It is absurd, hilarious, and completely shameless. They actually designed it so that if multiple parties defeat a floor boss together, only the party leaders get their names on the monument. That is right, all the other people who sweated, strategized, and almost got wiped out get absolutely nothing. Not a single engraved letter. Imagine spending hours fighting a giant monster and then being told, "Sorry, you do not count, your name is not worthy." Just add a drop-down menu or a scrolling list for crying out loud. If this were a real game, players would be screaming, throwing keyboards, and quitting left and right. Yet in the show, everyone just shrugs like it is normal. The level of unfairness is staggering, and somehow we are supposed to think this is fine. It is laughably bad design, and it makes zero sense. Oh, and here's the kicker. The Sleeping Knights all want their names engraved. So naturally, they have to beat the boss together as a single party. Fine, makes sense in theory. But then, why on earth do they not just ask Kirito for help? This is the guy who literally soloed higher floor bosses back in Sword Art Online without breaking a sweat. He has already played the game before, so he should have mastered floor mechanics, understands the attack patterns of the bosses, and he also has the legendary Holy Sword Excalibur from the previous arc. I mean, if Kirito cannot crush a weaker floor boss, then what is he even doing? The whole setup reeks of contrived storytelling. As if the author is deliberately ignoring the obvious solution just to make the plot artificially tense. It is like watching someone refuse a fire extinguisher while their house is on fire and then acting shocked when things go wrong. And if only party leaders get their names engraved on the monument, then why not have each member of the Sleeping Knights lead a separate party to defeat the boss? That way, every single one of them could have their name immortalized for all eternity. It is such an obvious solution that it makes you wonder if the characters are actually trying to fail on purpose. How did they not think of that? It is almost impressive in its sheer incompetence. The most obvious solution is literally staring them in the face, but of course they cannot take the easy route. Instead, they have to come up with some convoluted, completely contrived method that makes zero sense. It is like watching a group of geniuses try to solve a puzzle by throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping something sticks. Simple ideas are apparently too much work in this show. They explain that a party can have up to 7 players max, but why 7? Who decided 7 was the magic number? It is such a completely arbitrary limitation. In real online games, party size is flexible and depends on strategy, dungeon design, or just how many friends you want to play with. And it gets even more ridiculous because we have already seen that you can recruit NPCs to join your party. Like in the previous arc when the characters got Freya to tag along, so how does that even work? Does the 7-player limit include NPCs or not? The show does not bother to explain. It is just another example of sloppy, inconsistent rules that exist only to make the story dramatic while making zero sense in actual game logic. It is like putting a speed bump on a highway for no reason and then acting surprised when traffic slows down. And if you can recruit NPCs to join your party, then why on earth did the Sleeping Knights not try that first? It is such an obvious solution that any real gamer would think of immediately. Instead, they insist on struggling with their tiny party like it is some epic, insurmountable challenge. It makes them look incompetent, and it makes the story feel artificially difficult just so the plot can drag along. The writers are basically saying, "We know the solution exists, but we will ignore it because it would make our main characters look less heroic." It is lazy storytelling at its finest. The Sleeping Knights offer to pay Asuna to join them, but of course she does not want money. Why is every character in this show so incompetent? They act like helping strangers for free is normal, which is completely absurd in the context of a real game. In reality, no player with half a brain would risk time and effort for absolutely nothing in return. It is just like back in Sword Art Online when Lisbeth forged Kirito a sword for free and then refused any payment. The show seems to think that generosity without consequence is heroic. But in any realistic gaming scenario, it just makes the characters look naive and the story completely unconvincing. Asuna agrees to join the Sleeping Knights, but of course, there is absolutely no benefit for her. She does not get any money, she does not know these people, and yet she is somehow willing to risk her time and effort to help them. For what exactly? Oh right, because the plot demands it. Not because it makes any realistic sense or because there is a natural reason for her to do so. The story just handwaves logic away and expects us to accept that Asuna is suddenly a saintly volunteer in a world where actual players would never lift a finger for strangers without a very clear reward. You could just say that I am being negative and cynical. Sure, in real life people might help each other out just for the heck of it. And maybe in some idealized version of online games players are generous and selfless. But as someone who has been grinding in online games for over 2 decades, I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that is absolutely not true. Players, just like people in real life, are selfish. They are not going to waste their time and effort helping you simply because you asked nicely or because it would be the right thing to do. That is not how the real world works, and it is not how real players behave. The idea that Asuna would just jump in to help strangers is laughably unrealistic and exposes just how lazy the story is in thinking through human behavior. It would make a lot more sense if Asuna was being paid. Then at least the viewer could understand her motivation. She would be helping the sleeping knights for a reason that actually exists in the world of the game. Not just because the plot waves its hands and says she must. Right now, she is literally risking her time, effort, and in-game resources for absolutely nothing in return. That is not strategy. That is not roleplay. That is lazy writing pretending to be heroic. Giving her money as motivation would make her choices relatable, logical, and at least a tiny bit believable. Honestly, if a random player in an online game came up to me asking for help, my first thought would be that it is a scam or some kind of trick. I would not give them any attention. I would ignore them completely and act like they do not even exist. The fact that Asuna immediately falls for it and believes everything is just not realistic at all. Nobody would trust someone that fast. It makes no sense and just feels completely fake. Asuna asks Yuki why she did not just ask Kirito to help them out. Yuki replies that she does not know, he just did not feel right. That is easily the lamest excuse ever. If the Sleeping Knights really needed a strong player, Kirito would have been the perfect choice. He literally solos higher floor bosses on his own, and already knows all the mechanics. Instead we get Asuna, because the writer clearly wanted to focus on her this arc. So he had to conjure up some dumb, hand-waved reason that makes no sense in universe. It is just like the creator of Sword Art Online forgetting why he even created the game in the first place. Lazy, inconsistent, and completely absurd. Kirito found out the secret of Yuki, and suddenly she acts like that is the end of the world. Who even cares? If he already knows her secret, then there is literally nothing left for her to hide. At this point, her paranoia is just wasted screen time, and the plot is milking tension that does not exist. It is like watching someone slam a door shut after everyone already saw what was inside. The sign for this tavern is just random gibberish. You cannot read a single thing on it. It looks like something an artificial intelligence spat out and said, "Yeah, that will do." Honestly, I would know since I am literally using artificial intelligence to generate the visuals for this video. But here is the kicker. I have a $0 budget for this video. That is right, Zero. I am doing everything on my own, every single bit of research, editing, and snarky commentary. And yet somehow my little one-person operation is expected to look more coherent than Sword Art Online, which had millions of dollars in its budget and an entire army of animators, writers, and producers at its disposal. And what do we get for all that money and manpower? A sloppy, inconsistent, half-baked mess that looks like it was thrown together in a day. No amount of budget should ever justify this level of laziness. It is embarrassing. It is painful. And it is hilarious that anyone still pretends this is high-quality entertainment. You can see the Sleeping Knights Guild icon plastered next to the name of Asuna near her HP bar. But here is the thing. She did not actually join the guild. She is just helping them out for a boss fight. That means there should be no icon since she is not an official member of the guild. None. Zip. Nada. But of course the show cannot even get this basic elementary detail, right? It is like the animators just shrugged, slapped the icon there, and called it a day. Attention to detail? Never heard of it. Asuna is suddenly disconnected from the game because her mom pulled the plug in real life, and the show treats this like a minor inconvenience. She is extremely lucky this did not happen back during Sword Art Online, Because if it did, she would be dead on the spot. No warning, no second chance, just a funeral. 213 players already died in Sword Art Online because someone in the real world tried to remove the nerve gear from their heads. That was established early on. So watching this scene now just makes everything feel even more careless and stupid. The show wants the drama of a sudden disconnect, but it forgets that this exact action used to be a death sentence. It is another reminder that the writer only remembers the rules of his own world when it is convenient, and forgets them the moment they get in the way of a cheap scene. The clock in the show displays the date as Tuesday, January 6th, but that is completely wrong. It should be Wednesday, January 7th, since this is supposed to be the next day. The arc literally started on Tuesday, January 6th, and Asuna even said she was going to fight Zekken tomorrow. So today has to be the 7th. It is such a small detail, yet the show cannot even get that right. How hard is it to check a calendar? This kind of sloppy mistake makes the whole world feel cheap and unpolished. Asuna is late to dinner again, and that is why her mom pulled the plug. Seriously, this is the dramatic tension the show chooses to focus on? Who tuned into Sword Art Online to find out if Asuna is going to be late for dinner or not this time? This is so painfully boring and mundane that you cannot help but wonder what the writer was thinking. People watch anime for escapism, to dive into fantastical worlds and thrilling adventures they cannot experience in real life. Not to sit through rich girl first world problems and parental scolding. It is like the show took a sledgehammer to any sense of excitement and replaced it with grocery list drama. Asuna is mad that her mom pulled the plug, and she complains that her mom could have just shaken her or yelled in her ear and she would have gotten an in-game alert about it. Which, honestly, is just terrible game design. Why on earth would you want the game to send an alert every time someone messes with you in real life? That basically forces players to sit in a soundproof bubble if they want to play without constant interruptions. Imagine other people having a conversation in real life and suddenly your headset blares an alert because someone said your name too loudly. It makes zero sense. And it is just another example of the writer not thinking about how any of this would actually work. It took Asuna 5 whole minutes to log out last time because she had to say goodbye to everyone. That is just unbearably cheesy and sappy. I mean, why does she feel the need to spend 5 minutes waving and chatting with people she is literally going to see again tomorrow? She's not marching off to war or saying farewell to people she will never see again. It is just forced drama and melodrama for the sake of padding a scene, and it makes her look ridiculously over-emotional for no good reason. And social media should absolutely exist in this world. Asuna could just text or message her friends on any of those apps, post a quick update, or even video call them. Why is the game suddenly the only way for her to connect with anyone? It is like the writer is deliberately ignoring every realistic method of communication just to force her into more contrived, padded scenes. The suspension of disbelief is gone when you realize. She has 100 easier options and yet chooses the most inconvenient one. Asuna promises to be more careful next time, and her mom drops the ultimate threat. One more slip-up and the headset gets confiscated. Really? The show thinks this is some high-stakes drama? If I wanted to watch a parent scold their kid, I could already witness that free of charge in real life. This is not thrilling, this is mundane, boring, and completely uninteresting. It adds zero tension, zero excitement, and yet somehow the writer thinks it is a plot point. And let us not forget that Asuna is a rich girl. What exactly is stopping her from simply just buying another headset if her mom confiscates this one? Absolutely nothing. This is why making Asuna a rich, spoiled brat was such a terrible choice. It would have been far more compelling if she were poor, struggling in real life, and playing the game was her only escape from a harsh, miserable world. Then at least her stakes would feel real instead of this first world whining over a gadget she could replace in 5 minutes. Plus, Asuna is over 18 now, which makes her an adult. She does not have to listen to her parents anymore. She should be independent, making her own choices, and deciding how to spend her time without someone looming over her like a disciplinary shadow. Yet the show keeps her tethered to the whims of her mother like a spoiled child who cannot handle a single ounce of freedom. It is absurd. If Asuna is an adult, why is she still being micromanaged over every little decision? From when she logs off the game to whether she eats dinner on time. The whole setup undermines her character and makes the story feel like a bad middle school drama instead of anything resembling meaningful adult conflict. Asuna is mad at her mom because her mom does not understand why she would continue to play more virtual reality games after spending 2 years trapped in one and facing the possibility of dying. Except here is the hilarious part. There was no real possibility of dying back in Sword Art Online. Players could literally stay in the safe zones all the time and be 100% guaranteed to survive. The whole so-called death game premise collapses instantly. It is not even remotely like the Hunger Games or any real life or death scenario. The stakes are completely fake, and the writer somehow expects us to treat it like mortal peril. And of course her mom is not even right. People do not magically stop doing the things they love just because something bad happens. There are plenty of real-world examples. Take Aaron Ralston, for instance. The man lost his right arm in a canyoneering accident and had to saw it off himself with a dull pocket knife just to survive. And yet, does he quit outdoor adventures? Of course not. He continues to mountaineer and climb like nothing ever happened. So Asuna continuing to play virtual reality games after her traumatic Sword Art Online experience is completely realistic, and the scolding of her mom is just absurd. Another example would be Bethany Hamilton. She's a professional surfer who had her left arm bitten off by a shark, and yet did that stop her? Of course not. She kept surfing at the highest levels, competing professionally, and proving that a traumatic experience does not automatically ruin your passion or make you stop doing what you love. So Asuna continuing to play virtual reality games after a stressful experience is perfectly reasonable. And the outrage of her mom is just absurdly overblown. But I guess I should not even be blaming her mom. The real culprit here is the writer, because he is the one who came up with this character and fed her every single ridiculous line like a chef on a bad cooking show. The mom is just a puppet, blindly spouting nonsense, acting as if she actually matters to the plot. It is not her fault that she exists to nag and scold in exactly the way the author imagined. Annoying, overbearing, and about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. Honestly, I am starting to think the writer sat down, thought, how can I make the most boring, first-world, problem-filled parent ever? And then hit every note perfectly. Bravo, I guess. Asuna has a picture of some random structure on her wall. Is this supposed to mean something? Because I have absolutely no idea what it is. Is this the kind of high art that rich people get excited about while the rest of us mere mortals just stare blankly? Maybe it is some profound statement about life, the universe, and everything, but somehow I doubt it. Or maybe I just do not get it because I am not filthy rich and therefore not enlightened enough to appreciate a random picture hanging on a wall. It really makes you wonder if the writer included it just to remind us that Asuna is rich, not to add any actual meaning. Asuna is not hungry, so she does not go to dinner. This is yet another reason why making Asuna rich is terrible for storytelling. Since she has everything handed to her on a silver platter, she can just skip a meal like it is no big deal. If she were poor, she would have to actually fight, or at least hustle for her next meal, not casually decline it because she is not in the mood. But no, instead we get rich girl first world problems, where skipping dinner is a plot point worth lingering on. Asuna is mad, get over it already. Watching her throw a full-blown tantrum over the slightest inconvenience is absolutely laughable. Just because something did not go her way and her mom had the audacity to tell her to stop spending all her time in the game, suddenly the world is ending for her. It is like a toddler throwing a fit because someone touched their favorite toy. Except somehow this is supposed to be a grown young woman with real responsibilities. Oh, and it just dawned on me that the hair color of Asuna does not even match the rest of her family. Everyone else has plain brown hair and she rocks this strawberry blonde nonsense. Is she adopted, or did the writer just decide to throw in some random anime aesthetics and hope nobody notices? You could argue that Asuna just dyed her hair, but she has the exact same strawberry blonde in the flashback scenes as a kid. Unless she has been dyeing her hair since toddlerhood, which would be absurd, this is a glaring plot hole. The show cannot even keep something as basic as hair color consistent. Asuna goes outside and starts crying. If the show thinks this is supposed to make the audience feel sorry for her, then it fails miserably. Why on earth should anyone feel sympathy for a spoiled rich girl who has every possible comfort handed to her on a silver platter? She's crying over minor inconveniences, not real struggles, and it is impossible to take it seriously. Some dumb people might actually be falling for this and bawling their eyes out. Not me. I expect good writing, competent character choices, and consistent world building. The show cannot just wave a sad scene in my face and expect me to suddenly feel sorry for a spoiled rich girl. That is not how empathy works, especially when the character has zero real struggles. Back in the game, the characters start rambling about some so-called strategy to defeat the boss. It is pure nonsense that would mean absolutely nothing to anyone who actually plays games. They are just flapping their gums about positioning and vague tactics. But real players would have a much deeper discussion: numbers, stats, mechanics, exploits, counters, actual meaningful planning. This, by comparison, is just filler to make them look like they are doing something important. The characters have to grind through some mobs to reach the boss room, and surprise, surprise. They are literally the exact same mobs that Kirito slaughtered back in Sword Art Online. How convenient! The animators can just copy-paste the same assets and call it a day. No effort, no creativity, just lazy recycling. Originality apparently died somewhere between the first episode and this one. Asuna goes on and on about how the Sleeping Knights are a great team. How about actually showing that they are a great team instead of making her narrate it like a lazy podcast host? A little visual storytelling never hurt anyone. But apparently the writer of this show has never heard of the show Do Not Tell principle. We do not need Asuna announcing they are a good team if the scenes actually demonstrated it. But of course, that would require effort, creativity, and thinking beyond a dialogue box, so naturally the writer could not be bothered. There's a labyrinth in this game, but labyrinths are straight out of Greek mythology. So what is it even doing in a game that is supposed to be based on Norse mythology? In Greek myth, the labyrinth was a massive structure built by Daedalus for King Minos of Crete to trap the Minotaur. It is absolutely nothing to do with Norse myths, gods, or monsters, yet here it is, shoehorned in like someone just threw it in because they could not come up with a better dungeon. It is lazy, inconsistent, and screams, I do not care about thematic cohesion. But then, again, we saw 2 Minotaurs in the previous arc. So apparently being mythologically inaccurate is just part of the brand for this terrible game. Consistency, thematic accuracy, or even basic research. Forget it. The writer clearly does not care about any of that. He just throws in whatever he feels like, waves his hands, and expects the audience to nod along like it makes sense. Accuracy in world building clearly took a permanent vacation. Most people probably do not care, but I am not most people. I actually care. Other viewers might not even know the difference between Hercules and Heracles, but I am a mythology fan. Seeing all these inaccuracies thrown around like confetti hurts my brain. It is like watching someone serve up a gourmet dish and then dump a bucket of ketchup on it. Utterly disrespectful to anyone who actually knows what they are talking about. The characters finally find the boss room, and what do you know? The door looks exactly like the Gleam Eyes boss room door from Sword Art Online. Once again, the animators are taking the lazy route, reusing assets instead of coming up with anything new or original. It is convenient, it is sloppy, and it screams that effort went out the window somewhere around episode 1. Asuna casts a spell to reveal some players who are invisible, and this is terrible game design on multiple levels. First, having a spell that reveals other players is a massive invasion of privacy. Those players were clearly trying to stay hidden for a reason, and now Asuna can just see them like some omnipotent busybody. Second, invisibility itself is already a nightmare. You could sneak around, eavesdrop on private conversations, or stalk people without them knowing. Combined, these mechanics create a harassment paradise. If this were a real game, there would be outrage, bans, and a flood of angry forum posts. It is not clever, it is just bad. In any well-designed game, invisibility usually comes with trade-offs. Limited duration, slower movement, or risk of detection. A spell that completely negates invisibility with zero drawbacks destroys any strategic depth. Players cannot plan sneaky attacks, ambushes, or reconnaissance because one ability makes stealth meaningless. Stealth-based gameplay is supposed to reward skill, timing, and clever thinking. If you can just cast a spell and nullify all of that, then there's no skill involved. A player who invested time in learning how to sneak and be invisible effectively is instantly punished for no reason. This spell is effectively an I win button against any stealth or trickery. Once one character has it, other players are forced to either overcompensate with stronger gear or more abilities, which leads to power creep and an unbalanced game environment. A big part of stealth mechanics is suspense. Players fear discovery. Tension builds, and every choice matters. A spell like this instantly kills all suspense. There is no longer a reason to hide or plan carefully, making encounters feel boring and shallow. Good games give players multiple options to approach situations: fight, sneak, distract, or negotiate. With a spell that reveals invisibility, one of those options is completely invalidated, reducing player freedom. Players who invested in the idea that stealth is realistic or magic has limitations will be jolted out of the experience. Suddenly, the world does not follow any internal rules. Invisibility, which should be a major tactical tool, can be ignored by a single overpowered player. In multiplayer games, the ability to nullify stealth can be exploited. Players could hunt down weaker or solo players who cannot counter the reveal, creating an unfair and frustrating environment. The Sleeping Knights are suddenly ready to fight other players, which apparently means there is PvP in this dungeon. Brilliant, because nothing says. Fun and fair game, like letting players attack each other while they are just trying to get to a boss or level up. Every step you take could result in some random guild ganking you, and there is absolutely no strategy involved, just pure chaos. In a well-designed game, there are designated PvP zones, areas where you know danger is coming and you can prepare for it. Not everywhere you walk, not in the middle of a dungeon, not while you are casually grinding some mobs. But hey, why bother with actual rules or player safety when you can make the game frustrating, unfair, and completely unfun? If this were a real game, players would quit instantly. Imagine trying to strategize or enjoy the world, only to have some rogue player smack you down because the developers thought it would be exciting. Exciting for whom? Certainly not for the players who just want to play the game without constantly worrying about being randomly murdered. But, of course, the show does not care. Balance, fun, fairness. Totally irrelevant. The only thing that matters is drama for the plot, even if it makes the entire game system nonsensical. The other players claim that they were hiding because they were waiting for someone and did not want to get hit by a mob. Oh, really? There are literally no mobs anywhere in sight? Not a single one? That is your excuse? Lane does not even begin to cover it. If the writer actually wanted this to feel remotely believable, how about showing some dangerous mobs lurking around? Just a little tension, a tiny bit of danger, maybe a few fire-breathing wolves or something, anything that makes their hiding make sense. Instead, we get characters crouched behind a rock for no reason at all, looking like extra NPCs in a poorly staged scene. It is the kind of lazy storytelling that insults the intelligence of the viewers, and yet somehow the show expects us to nod along like this is totally plausible. And this also means that being invisible lets you sneak around and bypass all the mobs. Terrible game design alert. If that is really how it works, then every single player would just go invisible and skip all the mobs, turning what should be a challenging dungeon crawl into a completely meaningless stroll. Why even include monsters at all if everyone can ignore them? There should be some restriction, some countermeasure, something to prevent abuse, but of course there is nothing. The writer just waved a magic invisibility wand and said, "Problem solved," without thinking about how this ruins the entire balance of the game. It is like handing out cheat codes to every player and then acting surprised when the game stops being fun. The Sleeping Knights plan to enter the boss room and give it a try. But here is the hilarious problem. There is no real threat of death in this game. If they mess up, if they die, if they completely flub the fight, they just respawn and try again like nothing ever happened. There is zero tension, zero stakes. Zero reason to actually care. In the original Sword Art Online, dying meant actual death, which at least gave players a reason to be cautious and feel pressure. Here, it is just a pretend boss fight with pretend consequences. If they are not the first ones to defeat it, they can just wait for the next floor boss and try again. It is laughable. Without the death game gimmick, this whole arc loses any sense of urgency, identity, or importance. The players might as well be running through a tutorial while the author twiddles his thumbs. Asuna flicks another character on the head, and apparently it hurts him. Really? This is a feature in the game? If this were a real game, that would be classified as harassment. You could imagine an entire online community reporting Asuna for assault or griefing. Players should not be able to physically harm or annoy other players just for giggles. Yet here we are in the Sword Art Online universe, where the author apparently thought it would be fun to let characters flick each other like cartoon characters. It is just another example of terrible, unrealistic game design, the kind that would make any real gamer log off and never return. Asuna tells the others that if they die, they should not respawn right away. Instead, they should hang out and study the attack patterns of the boss like some kind of casual field trip. This is terrible game design. In any real game, bosses are supposed to be challenging, not laughably easy because you can just die. Watch their every move and come back perfectly prepared. If every player could just pause, observe, and casually learn the attack patterns of a boss before retrying, none of the fights would ever be tense or exciting. Respawning should be instant, or at least limited in some way. Not a reason to stop and have a picnic while the boss waits for you to take notes. Sword Art Online somehow takes the one thing that should be stressful, boss fights, and makes it boring, safe, and utterly meaningless. And these are supposed to be the same bosses from Sword Art Online that Asuna already played. She has literally fought these monsters before. She should know how the mechanics work down to the last detail. Yet here she is, acting clueless like she just spawned in the game for the first time. How is that even possible? The writer somehow expects us to believe that years of experience fighting the exact same bosses has vanished from her brain overnight. It is baffling, lazy, and insulting to anyone who has ever actually played a game. This is the kind of nonsense that makes you wonder if the author even remembers the rules of his own universe. The boss is some random four-armed, two-headed giant, and it looks about as exciting as a soggy piece of cardboard. It is supposed to be a terrifying challenge, but instead it just screams boring and bland. There is nothing unique, nothing intimidating, nothing memorable about it. You have literally seen this exact same type of generic monster in dozens of other games, and the show somehow expects you to gasp in awe. It is like the animators just grabbed the first big scary thing asset they found in their folder and slapped it on the screen. Creativity clearly took the day off. Furthermore, Norse mythology has giants called Jitnir and a few multi-headed creatures. But there is no famous mythological giant with 4 arms and 2 heads. Most Norse giants are depicted as enormous humans with supernatural strength or elemental powers, not as Frankenstein mashups of extra limbs and heads. Nothing says immersive Norse mythology, like a creature that looks like someone spilled extra limbs and heads into a blender. It is as if the animators said, "We do not care about lore or consistency. Let us just make something that looks weird and hope people will be impressed." Well, I am not impressed at all. It is boring, bland, and completely forgettable. And it makes the supposed mythology-based world feel like a bad fantasy fanfiction. I kid you not, the entire boss fight is skipped. Completely skipped. 1 second, the players are hyped and about to attack the boss, and the next, we are suddenly in the next scene with everyone respawning and chatting about what happened. The show somehow manages to skip all the actual exciting stuff. The tension, the strategy, the action, and instead shows us boring, mundane bits that literally nobody cares about. It is like they thought, why give the audience the fun parts when we can just gloss over them and talk about random things instead? The priorities in this show are so backwards, it is impressive in a terrible way. It turns out that Asuna recognized the guild of the players standing outside the boss room. They were scouts, whose entire job is to watch and monitor other players. So let me get this straight. Asuna knows exactly who they are and what they are doing, and yet she does absolutely nothing about it. She just casually ignores them like it is no big deal. If this were a real game, a player spotting enemy scouts outside a boss room would be alarmed, cautious. Or at the very least come up with a plan. But no, not in Alfheim Online. Instead, we are supposed to nod along and pretend that everything makes sense. The writing cannot even manage the most basic, logical responses from the characters. It is lazy, careless, and just plain insulting to anyone who actually understands games. And another thing, why does this guild even need scouts in the first place? In the previous scene, Asuna literally tells everyone that if they die fighting the boss, they should not respawn immediately. Instead, they are supposed to hang out, observe the attack patterns of the boss, and study its mechanics before trying again. So let me get this straight. The guild has people wasting their time just to watch other players when the players themselves are already supposed to be doing that by design. It is redundant, pointless, and yet another example of how the writing cannot think 2 steps ahead. It is as if the author threw logic out the window and just wrote whatever sounded dramatic in the moment. And let us not forget the most absurd part. You can literally spy on other players in this game. That is a massive invasion of privacy. Is there seriously no way to opt out of this? What if some players just want to fight the boss in peace without someone lurking in the shadows, taking notes or sabotaging them? Too bad, I guess. Welcome to Alfheim Online, where your personal space and autonomy mean absolutely nothing, and the game happily lets you be stalked for the sake of drama. Furthermore, a lot of the Alfheim Online players are probably former Sword Art Online veterans, so they should already know the attack patterns, the mechanics, and all the quirks of the bosses. Why on earth did they even need scouts or to spy on other players? It does not make any sense. It is like bringing a calculator to a math test you already aced, completely pointless. The game supposedly has strategic depth, but really it is just another example of sloppy design and the writer throwing in unnecessary mechanics for no reason other than to look busy. There is a dark spell called peeping in the game. It binds a familiar to another player, and whatever the familiar sees, the caster sees too. Once again, this is an absurd invasion of privacy. If this is allowed, players could spy on others while they are in bedrooms, bathrooms, or literally anywhere they expect some privacy. Imagine logging in to play a game and realizing someone is watching your every move while you are changing clothes or taking a bath. It is creepy, unethical, and just plain ridiculous. No sane game developer would include this mechanic unless they wanted to encourage harassment and lawsuits. The Sleeping Knights finally realized that the other guilds swooping in and beating the bosses on floors 25 and 26 was not a coincidence. Those players were sneaky little cheaters. They studied the bosses when the Sleeping Knights were fighting them and figured out the exact strategy to defeat them. This is yet another example of why spying on players is a terrible game mechanic. Other people do all the hard work and you get to waltz in and take all the credit. That is not how a real game works. In a proper game, defeating a boss should require your own teamwork, skill, and strategy, not leeching off the efforts of other groups. But, of course, in Alfheim Online, honesty and effort are optional. Why bother actually playing and figuring out a property strategy when you can just watch someone else do it for you? And seriously, why did the Sleeping Knights not figure this out sooner? After the first time some other guild swooped in and stole the boss kill, it should have been painfully obvious that something was off. Yet here they are, acting like clueless newbies who just discovered the concept of cheating for the first time. It makes them look incompetent and completely oblivious, like they wandered into a dungeon blindfolded and are surprised when someone else gets there first. If this were a real game, players would have smelled the cheating from a mile away and adapted immediately. But no, in this show, you can be inept and clueless and still call yourself a great team. The Sleeping Knights get all worked up and start steaming like little teapots. But of course, Asuna has to play the calm, reasonable adult and tells them to relax. She reasons that it is 2:30 p.m. in the real world, so the other guild will have trouble assembling a full raid party on such short notice. Seriously? Are we really supposed to care about time zones and lunch breaks here? If the other guild already knows the boss mechanics and how to defeat it, then they do not need a full raid party. They can stroll in as one group and stomp the boss, like they have every single time before on the previous floors. Asuna estimates that it would take them at least an hour to assemble a full raid party, which is laughable. This is January, the start of the month. People are off school, people are on vacation, and there are probably dozens, if not hundreds, of players online at this hour. But no, the plot conveniently decides that the other guild needs time to gather. Because of course, game mechanics and real-world logic must bow to the whims of lazy storytelling. It is like the show is intentionally handcuffing its own universe just to manufacture drama out of absolutely nothing. And let us not forget, if the other guild is one of those so-called top-tier boss-killing guilds, then a large chunk of their members are probably unemployed or professional gamers, who literally do nothing all day but grind and strategize. It should not take them an hour to assemble a raid party. Their entire existence is literally built around defeating bosses. So by definition, they should be ready to swoop in instantly the moment a strategy to defeat the floor boss has been found. But no, the show expects us to believe that even a guild of elite, obsessive players somehow needs so much time to gather their forces. As if they have jobs, chores, or a lunch break. It is a perfect example of the show prioritizing manufactured tension over any shred of logic. Even in fictional world, this level of incompetence is hilarious. And this is also why not being able to hide your guild is terrible game design. If Asuna had not seen the guild icon of the other players standing outside the boss room, she would never have been able to connect the dots. She would have just walked in blissfully ignorant, probably thinking the other guild showed up by coincidence. This mechanic basically hands away critical plot points on a silver platter and removes any sense of strategy or discovery. In a real game, being forced to display your guild logo at all times would be frustrating and immersion-breaking, because it gives away your plans, your location, and your strength to anyone nearby. Congrats, Sword Art Online! You have just turned what could have been a tense, strategic encounter into a paint-by-numbers guessing game. It makes absolutely no sense that you can hide your actual level in this game, but not your guild. If anything, it should be the other way around. Being able to hide your guild is essential for strategy and stealth, so that rival players cannot instantly track your alliances and strength. Meanwhile, your level should absolutely be visible, because other players need to know who they are dealing with and whether they stand a chance in a fight. Sword Art Online has once again flipped basic logic on its head, rewarding secrecy where it does not matter and punishing it where it actually counts. This is the kind of baffling, amateurish design that makes you wonder if the creator has ever even opened a real online game in his life. Asuna tells the Sleeping Knights that they should hurry back to the boss room and defeat the boss before the other guild shows up. And once again, we run into the big problem. There is no real death in this game. Without any actual risk, the tension is gone. If the players die, they just respawn and try again like nothing happened. There is no urgency, no stakes, nothing to make the fight exciting. This is not like back in the original Sword Art Online, where one wrong move could mean permanent death. Here, it is all consequences-free padding. And it makes the story bland, boring, and completely unengaging. The hurry-up drama falls flat because there is literally nothing to lose. It is like cheering for someone to win a race where everyone can press a reset button halfway through. The players are seen running back to the boss room, and I have to ask, is there really no faster way to get there? Can they not just teleport like every sensible online game ever made? If this were a real game, no one would be sprinting around everywhere. Players would get tired, complain, or just quit from sheer frustration, and yes, they can fly in this game. Except, apparently, they cannot fly in dungeons. Brilliant. Why even bother giving them flying mechanics at all if you're just going to slap arbitrary restrictions everywhere? It is like putting a Ferrari engine in a tricycle and wondering why it does not go faster. The writer keeps inventing these dumb rules just for the sake of forcing tension, and it makes absolutely no sense. The characters could not fly in the previous arc, and they cannot fly in this arc either. Wow, what a shocker. It is almost like the game is allergic to letting players actually use the mechanics it advertised. If flying is such a key feature of the game, why even bother including it at all? Instead, the show keeps piling on arbitrary restrictions for no reason, like it is trying to invent tension out of thin air. It makes no sense, it breaks immersion, and it is just plain lazy writing. The characters finally make it back to the boss room, but of course it is too late. The other guild is already camped outside with a semi-full raid party, looking ready to steamroll everything in their path. And yet Asuna calmly tells the Sleeping Knights not to worry. Because 20 players is apparently still not enough to advance. Really? How is she so certain about that? If 7 players are supposedly capable of taking on this boss, then 20 should be overkill. Especially when the other guild has been spying on them, knows all the attack patterns, and could just execute a perfectly coordinated strategy. But sure, let us all trust the gut instinct of Asuna instead of basic logic. The show continues to prioritize arbitrary drama over any semblance of rational gameplay. Asuna politely asks the other guild to let them take a shot at the boss, and of course, they say no. Because why make things simple when you can make them artificially frustrating? This is yet another shining example of why having open-world bosses in this game is a terrible idea. Instead of letting each guild tackle the challenge on their own, everyone has to fight over who gets the spotlight, like children squabbling over the last cookie. If the bosses were instanced, there would be zero need for this nonsense. Players could just walk in whenever they wanted and face the boss, without someone else blocking the door, like it is the most precious toy in existence. But no, let us watch grown adults get upset over arbitrary restrictions because game design. Yuki challenges the other guild members to a fight because they will not let them pass. According to her, sometimes you have to fight to get your point across. Wow. Just wow. The show is basically handing out life advice like a bad fortune cookie. Cannot get what you want? Solve it with violence. Yes, forget negotiation, compromise, or even just walking away. Just punch your problems into submission. This is not how the real world works, and it is absurd that the show tries to frame this as some kind of admirable lesson. If anything, it is teaching viewers that the first solution to every disagreement is swinging your sword. Congratulations, Sword Art Online, you are now the anime equivalent of a playground bully handbook. And of course, Yuki is completely overpowered. She defeats that other player without even breaking a sweat like it is nothing. It is almost laughable how the show keeps handing out superpowers like candy. Watching her is basically like watching a female version of Kirito, which is just predictable at this point. Oh look, another perfectly skilled solo powerhouse who bends the rules of the game for no reason, because we did not already see this exact thing in the previous arcs. Groundbreaking storytelling, really. Also, does this game only have one server or something? Because in any real online game, if a training spot or boss area is crowded, you can just switch to a different world, channel, or server. Problem solved. But apparently that is not a thing in Alfheim Online. Everyone is stuck on the same server, fighting over the same mobs, the same bosses, the same loot, like sardines in a can. It is awful game design on its own. And it makes you wonder if the developer ever actually played an online game in their life. This is not just lazy, it is actively frustrating for players. And again, if the boss was instanced, the players would not have to fight over who gets a chance to take it on. Everyone could just go in, do their thing, and the game would work as intended. Instancing would solve so many problems: crowding, griefing, spying, guild drama, you name it. But of course, the writer chooses not to do it. Why? Because creating artificial drama is apparently more important than making the game actually make sense. Nothing says realistic game mechanics, like forcing players to bicker and fight over something that could be handled in 5 minutes with proper design. And why is PvP even allowed in this random dungeon? If this were a real game, that would be a nightmare. You are just trying to fight some mobs or get to the boss, and suddenly another player can jump in and kill you for no reason. It would ruin the entire experience. PvP in non-designated zones is not exciting or challenging. It is frustrating, unfair, and basically just harassment. In a real game, players would quit or rage immediately. But, of course, the show lets this happen anyway because creating unnecessary conflict is apparently more important than making any kind of playable or fun game. The other guild members show up, and suddenly the sleeping knights are completely outnumbered. But of course, just when things are looking dire, Kirito appears out of nowhere like some kind of gaming messiah. He speeds past everyone, single-handedly defends the sleeping knights and saves the day, because of course he does. How convenient. How did he even know where Asuna and the sleeping knights were in the first place? Did he have some all-seeing radar that no one else gets? And while we are at it, how is he suddenly able to run on walls like a parkour ninja? The show cannot stay consistent for a second, but apparently Kirito breaking the laws of physics is perfectly fine because plot demands it. It is the ultimate example of a deus ex machina wrapped in shiny protagonist favoritism. It is terrible writing how Kirito has to swoop in and save the day. Instead of letting Asuna and the sleeping knights actually stand on their own and prove themselves, the writer had to make Kirito the ultimate savior, as if no other characters are capable of doing anything remotely impressive. It completely robs the sleeping knights of agency and makes the whole conflict pointless. The show could have built tension, shown teamwork, or let the characters grow, but no. The plot literally cannot function without Kirito strutting in at the perfect moment. It is lazy, predictable, and insulting to the intelligence of the viewers. This arc was supposed to focus on Asuna, to finally give her some attention and let her character shine. But no, Kirito has to swoop in like the self-appointed main character of the universe and steal every ounce of glory. It is so painfully forced and predictable that it makes me want to throw up in my mouth. instead of building tension, showing the skills or growth of Asuna, or letting the sleeping knights actually accomplish something on their own. The show hands everything over to Kirito on a silver platter. It is not just lazy writing, it is actively disgusting storytelling. And look at that, it did not even take an hour for the other guild to assemble a full raid party like I said earlier. The show clearly wanted to make Asuna look smart and strategic, but instead it just ended up proving me right. Shocking, I know. I have actually been playing online games for over 2 decades, so I kind of know what I'm talking about. Meanwhile, the writer apparently has no clue how games work and somehow thought it would be believable for a guild to need an hour to gather players at 2:30 p.m. in January. It is almost cute how they tried, but the reality is, my 2 decades of experience make them look completely amateurish. Kirito stabs his sword into the ground and suddenly cracks appear, like he is some kind of world-altering demigod. How are players even able to change the environment itself? That is terrible game design. Imagine if players were standing on a bridge and someone just stabbed the ground or swung a sword and the bridge crumbles, sending everyone plummeting to their deaths. Would that actually be fun? No, it would be ridiculous, unfair, and completely unbalanced. In a real game, the environment should have rules and limits, not bend to whatever the overpowered protagonist feels like doing in the moment. But of course, Sword Art Online does not care about consistency or logic. It just wants Kirito to look cool. Kirito tells the other guild members to stand down, declaring that they are not getting past him. Of course, the show has to make him seem like the ultimate good guy, the hero everyone should worship. It is so contrived and heavy-handed. Like the writer is holding up a neon sign that says, "Look at how righteous and strong Kirito is." Instead of letting the sleeping knights handle things on their own, Kirito swoops in to lecture the other guild like he is some moral compass with a sword. It is absurd and obnoxious, but of course that is the entire point. Make Kirito look impressive while everyone else is reduced to background decoration. Now let us go through some Reddit comments from when this episode first aired. One commenter claimed that everything was going in the right direction. They said they had a grin on their face the entire time. They loved the so-called synergy between the characters, and were apparently delighted by Kirito showing up at the end. Hard disagree. We must be watching completely different shows because this episode was terrible. Absolutely nothing was going in the right direction. I had a frown permanently glued to my face the entire time. The supposed synergy between the characters felt forced, awkward, and lifeless. And that Kirito appearance at the end? It did not inspire awe or excitement. It made me want to slam my laptop shut, close the tab, and never look at this garbage again. It is amazing how some people can watch the same scenes and come away thinking it is enjoyable while the rest of us are suffering through it. A lot of other people also seem to like the grand entrance of Kirito, which is honestly laughable. Their standards must be buried 6 feet underground if they genuinely think watching the same overpowered protagonist show up out of nowhere is cool or impressive. It is not suspenseful, it is not exciting. It is lazy storytelling masquerading as drama. Meanwhile, the rest of us are left shaking our heads at how the writer thinks throwing Kirito into every scene makes the show watchable. One commenter even worries that Kirito does not want Asuna to get her own harem. Relax, buddy, no need to lose sleep over that. What happens later in this arc guarantees that Asuna will never have her own harem. It is actually kind of hilarious to go back and read these comments with the knowledge of what is coming. People acting all worried and invested, while the story is quietly marching in a completely different, ridiculous direction. It is peak unintentional comedy. This commenter says that the show is good at making hateable characters. I do not disagree with that, sort of. The problem is that the characters are not hateable in a purposeful, clever way. They are just poorly written, bland, and annoying, which somehow comes across as hateable by accident. I highly doubt the writer set out to craft hateable characters from the start. This is not artistry, it is just the unintentional and spectacular result of lazy writing and zero attention to characterization. This commenter hoped to see Asuna in her old Sword Art Online outfit because they thought it looked cooler. Oh sure, because it makes total sense to wear gear from a completely different game universe, right? Newsflash. Just because you want to see your favorite outfit does not mean it fits the story or the game. Changing outfits actually makes sense. Imagine showing up to a Norse mythology-themed virtual reality game, decked out like you are still trapped in Sword Art Online. But apparently, some viewers do not take even 2 seconds to think about anything beyond their shallow nostalgia. This commenter actually thinks this was one of the better episodes and that the cliffhanger makes you curious about what happens next. Oh, please. That is laughable. Are we even watching the same show, or did they fall asleep and dream a different story? This episode was an unrelenting parade of laziness, bad writing, and contrived drama. And the cliffhanger? Come on, anyone with a functioning brain over the age of 3 could already predict the ending. Kirito, the overpowered plot god, will show up, wipe the floor with the other guild, and save the day while everyone else twiddles their thumbs. There is zero suspense, zero stakes, and zero reason to care. Calling this a good cliffhanger is like praising a wet paper towel for being a solid defense against a flood. It is beyond absurd. It is insulting to anyone who can string together 2 thoughts. This commenter was fangirling like crazy when Kirito showed up and completely stole the spotlight. Their grin apparently stretched from ear to ear, and their hands were glued to their cheeks, like they had just seen a magical unicorn descend from the sky. Are you serious? People actually enjoy watching Kirito swoop in and erase the effort of everyone else. Like he is the main character of the universe and the rest of the cast are just cardboard cutouts. Did I somehow stumble into a parallel universe where overpowered Mary Sues are celebrated and storytelling competence is optional? It is laughable. The entire arc was supposed to highlight Asuna. Yet, here comes Kirito to hog the glory, solve every problem effortlessly, and make everyone else look incompetent. And the fans love it. Absolutely love it. Congratulations, Kirito fanbase. You are cheering for lazy writing and the erasure of every ounce of tension or challenge. Bravo. Truly inspiring. This commenter thinks the secret of Yuki is that she is an NPC, and honestly, that would have been brilliant. It has mystery, intrigue, and actually makes you sit up and think for a second. But no, the writer cannot resist taking the most boring, predictable path imaginable. He snatches away any potential cleverness and replaces it with the kind of twist that makes you want to bang your head against the wall. It is almost a talent in a terrible way how he can take something that could have been fascinating and turn it into the most basic, uninspired, I did not even try reveal possible. If there was a medal for murdering potential, Sword Art Online would sweep the podium. This commenter says that this was their favorite episode of the season. Really? What exactly about this episode did you enjoy? Was it the painfully boring plot that drags on for no reason? The endless filler dialogue where characters sit in a restaurant and talk about nothing? Or the nonsensical game mechanics that make zero sense even for a fancy world? Maybe it was the annoying, poorly written characters who do everything for no reason at all. Or perhaps, and let us be honest, your favorite part was watching overpowered Kirito swoop in again like some sort of infallible superhero, stealing the spotlight and making everyone else look like amateurs. If that is what counts as good to you, then I guess we are living in completely different universes. This commenter thinks that Sword Art Online has somehow refound its spark from the first arc, refound its spark. Let us all take a moment to remember that the first arc was not good either. It was terrible, painful, a dumpster fire of plot holes, overpowered protagonists, and lazy writing. So I guess it is fitting that this arc continues the tradition of being absolutely awful. Consistency in its own special, terrible way. This commenter is apparently bothered that Asuna joined another guild and immediately started calling all the shots. Did you even pay attention? That was literally the entire reason the Sleeping Knights wanted her in the first place. They needed someone with leadership skills who could come up with good strategies, and she happened to fit the bill. How is it that I, a hater of this franchise, understand this terrible show better than an actual fan who is supposedly paying attention? It is baffling. This commenter says that you have to admit that sometimes it is awesome to watch Kirito. No, I do not have to admit that, and I will never admit that. Watching Kirito is not awesome. That is not even remotely the word I would use to describe it. If anything, it is tedious, predictable, and painfully convenient. Watching him show up and steamroll everything like some unstoppable messiah is not exciting, it is exhausting. Here's yet another commenter who thinks that the entrance of Kirito was awesome. I guess standards 11 years ago were not exactly high. Back then, apparently, showing up at the last minute and effortlessly saving the day counted as peak entertainment. Today, we can see right through that tired trope, but apparently some people still get giddy over it. It is laughable. This commenter does not understand why the other guild waits around. and watches other players fight the boss instead of experimenting themselves. And honestly, I agree with them. There is literally no risk in this game. Dying does not even carry any real consequences. If you fail, you just respawn and try again. There's no suspense, no danger, nothing at all. The guild spying on other players is just fake tension the show threw in to make it feel exciting, like sprinkling glitter over garbage and calling it a masterpiece. In a real game, nobody would waste their time lurking around while someone else does all the work. This commenter thinks that Yuki might actually be the mom of Asuna. Oh, the sheer audacity of that theory. It would be absolutely hilarious if it were true, but of course, it is not. Still, it is kind of fun to read these wild, convoluted fan theories that keep getting more and more bizarre as people desperately try to make sense of this mess of a show. I mean, when the source material is this inconsistent and ridiculous, the fans' imaginations have to go absolutely off the rails to fill in the gaps. This commenter is mad that Kirito had to be dragged into the story again. They were finally starting to enjoy Asuna getting some spotlight, and then, bam, Kirito swoops in like the universe could not survive without him. Finally, a voice of reason, I completely agree. Having the show constantly fall back on Kirito is lazy and pathetic. What makes it even sadder is that this comment got 2 down votes. 2. Anything remotely critical gets buried because the Sword Art Online fanbase cannot handle criticism. To them, the show, the characters, and everything in the franchise are flawless and untouchable. People are apparently not allowed to dislike anything about it, which is just sad, pitiful, and a little scary. This commenter flat out says that this anime is complete garbage, bottom of the barrel. Naturally, they got 12 down votes, but I agree with them 100%. Sword Art Online is trash. No arguments, no debate, just straight up garbage. Finally, someone speaking sense, a voice of reason in a sea of nonsense. And what happens? The fans swarm this comment like they just opened the literal box of Pandora. Like pointing out the truth is some unforgivable crime. It is amazing how defending a basic observation about how terrible the show is can cause an internet mob to descend. And that concludes my video on the 3rd episode of this arc. Once again, my video is many times longer than the actual episode itself. When you can come up with more criticisms than the show lasts, that is not just a small flaw. That is a flashing neon sign screaming, there is something deeply catastrophically wrong here. I mean, think about it, the episode barely lasted 20 minutes, and I could talk for over an hour dissecting every ridiculous choice, every sloppy plot point, every absurd game mechanic. If that does not tell you the show has serious problems, then I do not know what would. I am genuinely confused and baffled at how anyone could enjoy this show unironically. There's absolutely nothing good about it. Nothing to latch onto, nothing to get excited about, nothing that makes you want to keep watching. It is like a vacuum of entertainment and logic all rolled into one. If criticizing this garbage was not my job, I would have bailed long ago and never willingly returned. Honestly, trying to find something redeeming here is like digging for gold in a landfill. It is just not going to happen. The sad part is that I am not even halfway done with this arc. There are still 4 more episodes to suffer through, but quitting now is not an option. I have to see this train wreck all the way to the end. Stopping now would be like Heracles giving up on his 5th labor. Completely unthinkable and shameful. No, I will endure every cringeworthy moment, every nonsensical plot twist, and every overpowered Kirito cameo, because someone has to document just how badly this show keeps failing. This show has received praise it never deserved for far too long. It has been treated like an untouchable sacred relic of anime where even mild criticism is seen as a personal attack. It is time for someone to step in and actually speak the truth. Pull back the curtain and expose all the holes in this supposed holy work. Sword Art Online is not a flawless masterpiece that exists above scrutiny. It is a tangled mess of bad writing, lazy game design, and artificial drama held together by overpowered wish fulfillment. The blind admiration has gone on long enough, and it is past time to call it out for what it really is. I will not go easy, I will not show any mercy. It is time to bring balance to the force. There has been more than enough mindless glazing, empty hype, and blind praise piled on this show for years. And now it is time for some long overdue criticism, accountability, and basic common sense. This is not a love letter. This is not nostalgia bait. This is not me turning my brain off and clapping whenever Kirito walks on screen. This is a reality check. If something is poorly written, lazily designed, or propped up by artificial drama and overpowered wish fulfillment, it deserves to be called out, not worshipped. Fans have had a free pass to pretend this series is deep, smart, or well thought out, when it constantly contradicts itself, ignores its own rules, and mistakes spectacle for substance. I'm done pretending. That is fine. If that makes people uncomfortable, good. Comfort is how awfulness survives. The Sword Art Online fans are not going to like me for this, and honestly, I could not care less. I am not here for their approval, their validation, or their upvotes. I am here to say what they refuse to hear. If enjoying this show requires ignoring bad writing, broken game mechanics, and constant narrative hand-holding, then I am perfectly fine standing on the outside. I would rather be disliked for being honest than praised for going along with the delusion. The Sword Art Online fans really need to get over themselves and start looking at reality instead of their little fantasy bubble. This show is not a magical treasure that cannot be touched or questioned. It is a TV show, plain and simple. And just like every other show ever made, it can be terrible, messy, and full of dumb choices. Worshipping it does not make it perfect. Thinking it is above criticism does not make you smarter. It is media. Judge it like media, not like it is some untouchable holy relic. And really, the more the Sword Art Online fans scream at me to shut up, the harder I go at this train wreck. If pointing out glaringly obvious flaws makes anyone clutch their pearls, that is absolutely not my problem. Trying to silence criticism does not make the story any less lazy, the characters any less cardboard, or the plot any less ridiculous. It only proves how fragile and desperate this show is flawless defense really is. Keep yelling. I am not stopping. I am having too much fun watching the fan bubble implode. I will not yield. I am not backing down, I am not compromising, and I am definitely not softening my stance to spare the feelings of anyone. Everything the fans hold dear about this show, every sacred cow they insist is untouchable, is getting put under a microscope and torn apart piece by piece. If that ruins the illusion, good. If that shatters the fantasy that this series is somehow flawless, even better. Blind devotion deserves demolition, and I am more than happy to do the dirty work. Sword Art Online is not even in the so bad it is good territory. It is not like Morbius, where people can at least get some ironic enjoyment from memes and laugh at the absurdity. No, this is a different kind of tragedy. It is so painfully, relentlessly bad that it is not funny. There is no charm, no accidental brilliance, no moments that make you roll your eyes and chuckle. It is just bad. Flat out soul-draining, make you wonder why anyone made this bad. It is the kind of bad that leaves you staring at the screen, wondering how something can fail on every level without even giving you a single entertaining reason to keep watching. Literally nothing in this show works. Not a single thing. It does not do one thing right. You would think even a broken clock is right twice a day. Maybe, just maybe, Sword Art Online would stumble into doing something halfway decent by accident. No, not even close. Every plot twist, every character moment, every attempt at drama or action falls flat. Nothing lands. Nothing is entertaining. Nothing is good. It is a masterpiece of failure, a show that manages to be bad without ever being funny, clever, or even interesting for a single second. Watching paint dry is less offensive than this show. At least with paint drying, you do not have to suffer through terrible dialogue, endless boring scenes, or plot twists that make zero sense. At least it does not pretend to be exciting while dragging you through every painful second. At least it does not insult your intelligence at every turn. Compared to Sword Art Online, even watching grass grow feels like a thrilling roller coaster ride. I have no idea how this show got so popular. Were standards really that low back then, or did people just forget how to tell good from bad? Somehow, millions decided that this mess of lazy writing, bland characters, and nonsensical plot twists deserved praise. It is baffling, it is insulting. It makes you wonder if the hype was just a collective accident, or if viewers were so starved for entertainment that they celebrated awfulness as genius. Sword Art Online is a textbook case in mass delusion. It is amazing how millions of people can look at this steaming pile of nonsense and call it amazing. Meanwhile, here I am, apparently the only sane person left in this world, trying to tell the truth about this disaster of a show. It is like watching an entire fandom walk off a cliff while applauding the view. And the sad part? They do not even realize how ridiculous it all is. The Sword Art Online fans are worshipping a false prophet. They are being swindled, blinded by nostalgia and hype, and they do not even understand what they are fighting for. They are defending a show that does not deserve loyalty, praising scenes that do not deserve attention, and clinging to characters that do not deserve care. It is almost impressive, the level of devotion to something so hollow. But mostly it is just sad. It is pathetic how the fans attack anyone who dares to dislike the show. As if having a different opinion is a crime, as if thinking critically is some kind of offense. They swarm, they shout, they try to shame anyone who points out the obvious flaws, all while pretending their blind worship is somehow courageous or smart. Meanwhile, the moment someone questions their precious fantasy, they melt down like toddlers denied candy. It is both sad and hilarious if it were not so exhausting to watch. If you thought Star Wars fans were bad, then you have clearly never met Sword Art Online fans. These people do not even like each other, yet somehow they all manage to act like a united army defending a terrible show. That alone says everything you need to know about the fandom. Full of chaos, full of ego, and completely incapable of self-reflection. They are loyalty without sense, devotion without reason, and it is as ridiculous as it is sad. I am glad I am not a fan of Sword Art Online. Never was, and never will be. I want absolutely no part of that nonsense. No part of the endless hype, no part of the fan wars, and no part of defending something so painfully awful. Watching other people worship, it is enough to make me grateful. I have taste, sanity, and the ability to spot garbage when I see it. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more Sword Art Online hate content. We are not here to clap politely and move on. We are here to keep the hate burning bright, to question everything, and to never, ever settle for bad writing just because it is popular or nostalgic.